Well, the arraignment this week of former US President Donald Trump brings focus back onto the US economy, the biggest external influence on our economic outcome. And with rising interest rates in the US, persistently high inflation and recently wobbly banks, the case now has an economic as well as a political impact. Adam Creighton is the Australian newspaper's Washington correspondent and a contributor on Sky News and joins me from New York, where he's been covering this Trump case. Adam, as always, many thanks for your time. I mean, it does potentially go to the heart of confidence in the US economy, especially as this case unwinds and the political ramifications become more real.
Yeah, look, I think that's right, Ross. I mean, it can't be good for confidence. On the first point on confidence, I think a large share of Americans, it's not clear if it's a majority or not, but certainly a large proportion of Americans think that the prosecution of Trump is largely political. And you've got to think that that's going to undermine confidence in the US judicial system, which in turn undermines confidence in the US, I suppose. I mean, it's hard to make a case for economic confidence, I suppose, but it's definitely a negative. And I think the more important point perhaps is that it's sucking up all the oxygen for discussion about other far more pressing issues, whether it's the southern border, whether it's inflation or interest rates or just general economic reform. No one in the US is talking about anything else except Trump. It's the headline every day. And we found out he's going to be in court on December the 4th. So basically there's going to be speculation now, for the next 9 months, basically, on this case, which, really, at least in my view, shouldn't have been brought. It was interesting in Trump's speech at Mar-a-Lago that he gave last night here in Florida, that he didn't talk about the economy, actually. It was unusual. I thought he might have used that extraordinary platform of essentially having the whole world listening to him to talk about the problems of the US economy, but he didn't. He talked about all the legal cases that are run against him. So, look, it remains to be seen what the ultimate impact is for the time being.
And with those higher interest rates and the high inflation, the US economy, if it's not in recession already, is probably headed there sometime shortly. So that puts pressure on the Democrats, who at the same time are trying to effectively hobble the next likely Republican candidate being Trump, the most popular still in the Republican Party.
Yeah, look, I've been pretty shocked, to be honest, that the US economy hasn't fallen into recession yet. People have been saying this now for a good 12 months, ever since the sharp increases in interest rates started in March last year. But consumer spending is largely held up. The stock market certainly hasn't collapsed. It certainly hasn't collapsed by as much as you would expect, given the size of the increase in interest rates. But I think the interesting point here in terms of the intersection of politics and economics is that Democrats are obviously hoping Trump wins the nomination because they think that he's very beatable in 2024. But the reality is that it's quite likely the US could be in a severe recession sometime next year. And of course, that's when people go to the polls. And everyone knows in every country, US and Australia, when there's a recession, people vote against the incumbent government. It may well be that the Democrats certainly unwittingly put Donald Trump back in the Oval Office if there's a recession.
And the other aspect of this is really about America becoming more insular, looking inwards. And particularly this court case makes America look inwards rather than outwards. The war in Ukraine is clearly one issue, and even AUKUS, the way in which Australia is wrapped up in that broader, sort of, if you like, push from China, with Xi Jinping this week going on a charm offensive in Europe. So, again, the timing of this is quite incredible in terms of the international geopolitics, political scene, and therefore the global economy.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ross, actually, just in terms of America's focus outward. As you say, certainly now it's very much inwardly focused. And as we know, Donald Trump has started campaigning against US involvement in the Ukraine war. And if he becomes the leading candidate, he'll be talking about that, basically every day in the media. And so that in turn is going to make Americans more generally less interested in spending money abroad, less interested in sending troops abroad. And that affects Australia, of course, because they're our most important ally. And if there is another Trump presidency or even a Trump-style presidency, perhaps Florida Governor Ron DeSantis runs and wins, perhaps, he's saying the same things as Trump too. So that could have big ramifications for AUKUS. I mean, I must say, I went to an AUKUS dinner just a few nights ago in Washington, and some people were surprised at the comments that Paul Keating made about AUKUS, of course, very critical, and some Americans do wonder whether or not that will ultimately undermine the Labor Party's support for the pact, and some in Congress, perhaps, who never liked the deal in the first place, will use that as an excuse, perhaps in the future, for the US to pull out, or at least to downgrade it in some way.
I'll tell you what, that is also fascinating in terms of the geopolitics and where Australia sits in that. But as you point out, you can't divorce the economics from the politics right now, especially coming up into the next election, where people will look back to the Trump term where the economy was strong and then coming now to a weakened economy. So that the contrast between the two and what people are feeling if unemployment is starting to rise is going to be very real.
Yeah, certainly. One of the protesters actually yesterday outside the courthouse, your question just reminded me, he said to me, times were so much better under President Trump. I mean, he was there supporting Trump, obviously. And he said that. That was the first thing he said to me. And so, and it's true. I mean, until the very end of Trump's presidency, the US economy was in very good shape, very low unemployment, very low inflation, and very low interest rates. And, basically all those things are not true now. And for people who tend, and that's most people, to blame the government for whatever the prevailing circumstances are, they will blame President Biden. So it's going to be fascinating.
It will be indeed, no doubt. Well, we'll keep up to date with that with you, Adam, in New York today and back in Washington in the near term. And we'll talk to you from there. Many thanks for your time.